Hi there, welcome to Phil's Kitchen. Here's my ultimate sourdough bread guide.
I don't wanna wait for our lives to be over. I want to know right now, what will it be? I don't wanna wait for our lives to be over. Will it be? Yes, or will it be? Sorry.
Hi, and welcome to Phil's Kitchen. Today we're going to be baking sourdough bread. I thought there was no better time to learn how to bake sourdough bread. All you need is flour, salt and water, and with that we can make a tasty loaf for these corona lockdown days. Let's get started. So to start with, got our mixing bowl, lovely, and we're going to add our 400 grams of flour. I like to use Dove's organic strong white bread flour, which is also unbleached. We're going to add about 8 to 10 grams of salt. We're going to add 230 grams of water. And then finally we're going to add our sourdough starter, which is just a mix of equal parts of flour and water. This just bubbles away, it ferments, quite funky smell. You can create one of these quite simply. You just mix 50 grams of flour, strong white bread flour and 50 grams of water. Leave it for a day, and each day you feed it with the same amounts of flour and water, and eventually you get this kind of bubbly mess which is a sourdough starter. So this is the basis for what we're going to be making bread with today. This will provide the yeast. So this is a yeast culture from the wild, from the yeast that's just in and around in the air. And this will help make the bread rise, make it nice and fluffy inside. So here we've got our 160 grams of sourdough starter. So that was fed last night with 80 grams of water and 80 grams of flour, which then left overnight. Feed the starter, it bubbles up. And is ready to use the morning after. So now just going to give this a quick mix. So this is just all the ingredients, the flour, the water, the salt and the starter. Give this just a light mix in the bowl. Once it's started coming together a bit, just going to turn this out onto the surface. You can see already at the moment it's kind of quite crumbly. It's not really much of a consistent dough. Just going to get all that flour out onto the surface. So now you've got your dough turned out onto the surface. What we're going to be doing is kneading this. So kneading is a process to help generate gluten, to help build structure within the loaf. I find a dough scraper quite helpful. This isn't essential. You can use a spatula or some other kind of scraping implement. And this is just helpful when the dough is quite sticky and inconsistent to kind of get it off the surface whilst you're kneading, and also use it to scrape down your hands. So what you'll notice now, I've been kneading for a few minutes, the dough's become a bit more glossy, it's sticking less to the surface, and it's becoming a bit tougher to the touch. So you've been kneading your dough for a few minutes and you've started to get this nice elastic, glutinous structured dough. How long should you knead it for? A lot of recipes suggest kind of 8 minutes, 10 minutes, but in fact the dough will tell you when it's ready. What we're going to do is something called the window pane effect. What you're going to need is a bit of oil. I'm just using some sunflower oil. Put some of that on your fingers. I'm going to scoop up the dough and just using its weight, the dough will naturally stretch out between your fingers. And what we're going to do is just run it between our hands and you'll start to see if there's enough gluten, you'll be able to see almost through the dough. It'll be slightly translucent and you can see it's not really tearing. And that's when we know our dough has been kneaded enough. So what we're going to do, we're just going to scoop and gather this into a nice ball. Just using our dough scraper here. So there we have it, our finished dough. We've built up this glutinous structure and now we need to let it rise. So the first proof will be about 4 hours long. Or until it's doubled in size. That can be up to about 5 hours, I find. So we're just going to put it in a bowl, cover it up and come back in 4 hours. So 4 hours have passed and our dough has doubled in volume. So we're now ready to do a stage called knocking back. This is where we push back the dough to its original size, and that's ensuring that all the air pockets in the dough are the same size as each other. So that way, when the dough bakes, we get like a nice consistent texture throughout the whole loaf. So we'll take some flour and just lightly dust the work surface. And then we're going to turn out our proof dough. And you'll feel immediately it's quite kind of soft and elastic. So what we want to do is just push it out, push out all those air bubbles. So the next stage is to shape our dough. So what we need to do is build tension across the surface of the dough, which will help, as it rises, build a kind of structure throughout the loaf. So we're going to do that by dragging the dough using 2 fingers to kind of pull under the dough, and then one hand to turn the loaf about 90 degrees. And that repetition of kind of pulling and turning will help build up that tension across the surface of the loaf. It's important to note here that actually you don't want the surface too floury. You'll find that the dough will just glide. You actually want a kind of slightly stickier surface that the dough will stick as you drag it to help pull it into a ball. You may find here that if you have a scraper, that's quite helpful in that shaping. So once we have this completed ball, you may find that just kind of resting it for a short period can help relax the dough slightly just before a final shape. But before we do that, I'm just going to dust my banneton. So this is just a bamboo basket that helps the dough rise, so it keeps the structure and prevents it from spreading out. If you don't have a banneton, one of these, you can use just a bowl, so like a big glass dish or a Pyrex dish with a kind of heavily floured tea towel. Just want to make sure that it doesn't stick. So we're going to flour this really well. Making sure the whole basket is covered. scoop up our dough, place it in the basket, and then cover the top with flour as well. So that's most of the hard stuff done. There are two options now, so we can let this prove for another 3 to 4 hours until it rises again to the top of this basket and then bake it. But usually what I like to do is bake it overnight. That helps develop a bit more flavour, and then I'll bake it in the morning, and it's often then a lot easier to score and to bake. It doesn't kind of very quickly slump down. So yeah, join me tomorrow for more. So it's now the next day and our dough has been proving overnight in the fridge. You can see it's risen up now to the level of the top of the banneton, which is really great. So now it's ready to bake. I find that I get the best results when I bake in a Pyrex dish. So this just helps create steam within the dish, and this helps the bread to rise. So one of the most common problems people find when they bake their bread is the crust will form before the loaf has had a chance to spring up in the oven. So this just helps keep that crust soft so the bread can rise and then the crust can form later. If you don't have a Pyrex dish like this, you can use just a baking sheet in the oven, but you may find that chucking in a jug of boiling water into a baking dish at the bottom can help create steam in the oven. And also if you put a baking sheet at the very top of the oven, that will kind of shield the loaf from the heat coming from the top of the oven. So just some tips there for you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn out this loaf into our dish. Using our lane, which is just a double-edged razor blade held within this just plastic sheath. Double-edged razor blades I find are the best things to score loaves, really sharp, and cut a lot better and cleaner than a knife. So scoring the bread just helps it open up in structure and helps give it room to expand. This is called a baker's signature, so this is kind of unique to each baker. It was used historically to help bakers tell their loaves apart in communal ovens. So this is mine, it's just a cross with then 4 little lines just to help it expand, and I find that works quite well. So we'll place the top of the Pyrex dish over that, and then that will go into the oven for 250 degrees for 25 minutes. And then once that is done, we'll remove the lid and it'll bake for a further 10 minutes just to get that nice golden brown texture. So now it should be about time to take the bread out the oven. So tip your bread out onto a cooling rack and resist the temptation to eat your bread immediately. You want to let it cool for about an hour to an hour and a half until it's fully cold, because you want to keep all the moisture within the bread. Sometimes I find putting over just a tea towel or something can help keep some of that in. So our bread has now cooled and it's ready to cut into. But let's first just listen to that crust. you've enjoyed this short guide to baking sourdough bread. If you've enjoyed this series at all, let me know in the comments below. Smash that like button. But also, if you have any comments, any questions on anything that I've talked about today, feel free to slide in the DMs, and I can answer any technical questions about your sourdough bread. And also, if you do decide to bake some bread, let me know. I'd love to see your pictures of your finished loaves, and hear your stories of how you've enjoyed baking bread. See you next time. Choo.